Friends, what's happened to us is we've forgotten the thread of the story. We can't just go back to the old stories. That won't be enough, the stories of the saints and sages. But we also can't go to the postmodern telling of my personal story. That's also not enough. We have to actually begin to realize that there's a new story to be told. And we begin to realize that my story is evolution whispering through me. It's ours to do, right? To tell the new story, the greatest moral erotic act, right, of this generation. And as we're here together in the infinity of intimacy, and we're here to kind of take this the next step. And we did a big week last week, right, on story. And we're gonna be kind of weaving this notion of story in a way it's never been woven in human history before. We're gonna be weaving together the sciences, the interior sciences, the exterior sciences, right? And merging together streams of wisdom and creating something new, right? Creating a new story, right? And creating a new story about story, right? And last week, we laid out a lot of pieces. We gathered a lot of pieces that we've talked about over the years. And so now we're kind of slow down. You move too fast, right? Right. That dates us from God. I remember that song came out, right, when I was like 4, right, or maybe 10, right? Well, like let's go slow now. Okay, let's take the longer way, which is the shorter way. So let's understand. So let's go a few steps together, and we'll look at our code, at our evolutionary love code. We're going to unpack this step by step, and I'm just wildly excited to be at this moment to do this with you. Okay, so are we ready? Are we ready to play a larger game? Are we ready to play a larger game like we've never played before? Are we ready? Who's ready? Who's ready? Are you ready? Are you ready to play a larger game, right? Are we ready to participate, right, in the evolution of love? So let's put that code right all the way down in the chat box, and let's step inside. Okay, so step one is we're gonna do this in 7 or 8 parts. So we're just gonna start today. So let's look at the evolutionary love code together, right? Reality is not merely a fact. Reality is a story. Reality is not an ordinary story. Reality is a love story. Reality is not an ordinary love story. Reality is an evolutionary love story, an outrageous love story. And your story, your outrageous love story, is chapter and verse in the universal love story. Right? Wow. Reality is not just an outrageous love story, right? Reality is an outrageous love story, which is a story of value, of inherent value, a story of value rooted in first principles and first values. Wow. Now, the second part of the code I'm not going to talk about this week. We're writing on that extensively. We've talked about it extensively, but we've talked about how existential and catastrophic risk, right, generated by complicated and not complex systems and exponential technologies, right, can't be addressed just by a new story and can't be addressed only by first principles and first values. Existential risk can only be addressed and transformed by first principles and first values embedded in a story of value. Or said differently, a story of value rooted in first principles and first values. Now let's take this slow. So let's start in the middle. Let's just start with maybe the first minute or two. Let's just start with a word. So in the original Hebrew, there's a word which Leonard Cohen loves, which is about the book of life. And in the book of life is Sefer, right? The book HaChaim, right? The book of life, right? Sefer, right? And someone maybe play with me in the chat box. S-E-F-E-R, Sefer. You can feel the word. S-E-F-E-R. Anyone got that for me? Right in the chat box? Fantastic. S-E-F-E-R. Okay. So Sefer, right, is a book. But that same word Sefer is also story. Right? So the book of life, my book of life is my story. So the central image in the interior sciences that we're placing at the center of what we're calling the new story is the understanding that my life is a text. There's the sacred text of the canonical great traditions, And there's the sacred text of what I called many years back in a book called Soul Prince. There's the sacred text of my sacred autobiography, right? So, wow. So Sefer, my book of life, is my sipur, same word, is my story. Now, the third meaning of that three-letter root, Sefer, right, in the original Hebrew, is sapar. You can feel it's the same word. And sapar means boundary. Right, so one of the things we need to know is what's the boundary of my story? And we're not going to talk about that this week so much. It's going to be the focus of next week. What's the boundary of my story? Who are the characters in my story, right? Are the characters in my story the people I think, my biological father, mother, uncle, right? Are those the characters? How do I widen the storyline? How do I include more people in my story? How do I include more people in my outrageous love story? What does it mean to realize that my love lists might be too short? Right? So sapar, the third meaning of the three-letter Hebrew root for story, which is the source code key word in the oldest mystical text we have called the Book of Creation. Right? The third meaning is sapar, which means boundary. Because the question you ask in a story is, where's the boundary of my story? Where does my story end, right? There's a new field in health called biofield health. But my health is not just me as a separate self-organism. I'm part of a larger biofield. I'm part of a larger field of dreams. I'm part of a larger field of meaning. I'm part of a larger field of value, right? I'm part of a larger field of amor, right? Its insides are aligned with love, writes Solomon, right? Like, wow, there's an Akashic field. There's a larger field, right? So that my story expands. That's going to be our focus next week. Okay, but that's sapar, that's boundary. And finally, the fourth meaning of this root, Sefer, is sapir, and sapir is sapphire, blue light. And the reason it's sapphire blue light, if you've ever practiced deeply in an interior tradition, is because when you actually meditate deeply and you access not just what we call in our language of the new story, true self, meaning I'm one with the field, but you access that which is beyond true self, which is unique self, right? I'm part of the field of reality, which is seamless, and I'm part of the seamless code of the universe, true self, but that seamless code of the universe is seamless, but not featureless. I'm a unique feature, right, in the larger story, unique self. So when I have a mystical experience, an awakened experience of unique self, I actually experience myself as being bathed in blue light. And many practitioners, myself included, right, from the great traditions, right, can attest to this experience. You have this experience of intense sapphire bathing in blue light. My friend Howard Bloom had this experience as well. Muktananda, right, the teacher of our dear friend Sally Kempton, speaks extensively about the blue light, right, as do the Kabbalistic traditions, right, as do the, right, the Sufi traditions. So sapir is when I'm in my unique self story, then I have this explosion of this kind of gorgeous sapphire. That's actually what happens in the yoga of that experience when I'm actually practicing and I actually have a direct experience of, wow, I'm in my story, right? I'm in the right place in my story. I'm doing the exact thing that I need to be doing at this moment, right? To be, right, God's verb in the larger story of reality. So that's one. That's just to kind of set us up. Now let's take the next step. Okay. You ready? Everyone with me? We good? We good? Who's with us? Just give us a yes if you're with us. Okay. So I want to take this slow step by step. We're going slow and gentle, right? Slow and gentle. Who else is with us? If you're new, just kind of step in, right? Just so we can hear you, right? Beautiful, gorgeous. Who else? Someone else. Give us a yes. Give us a yes in caps. We got a yes in caps. So give me a yes in caps. Okay. Let's feel each other. Let's feel each other around the world. We're holding hands. We're part of the story together. We're a band of outrageous lovers, right? We're a band of outrageous lovers. That's a yes. Yes, yes, yes. Let's feel each other. Feel me feeling you. Feel you feeling me. That's intimacy, right? Feel me feeling you feeling me, right? Feel you feeling me feeling you, right? We're holding hands. Okay, so here we go. So part two. Part two is big. Okay, and we're going slow. So we said last week that in order to heal the global intimacy disorder, which we've identified in the literatures that we're writing, in the great library that we're writing, we've identified as the root cause for existential risk, right? This global intimacy disorder, to heal it, right? We need close. We've identified two dimensions over the last several years. We've said we need first principles and first values. We've talked an enormous amount about what that is, and we'll talk about it more this year. And I'm in deep conversation around that, all last year, all this year. And I hope by the end of the year, we're going to produce a kind of, mega tome on first values and first principles that actually changes the source code. But for now, first values and first principles: freedom, integrity, fairness, right? Love, right? First principles and first values. You can't heal the source code. You can't, right, move us the next step. You can't deal with existential risk. You can't heal the global intimacy disorder without a universal grammar of value. And that universal grammar of value can't be made up value. It's got to be ontology. It's got to be real value, right? So that's one. And two, we've said, right, and I've talked about it, and Barbara's talked about it, right? I can't heal the broken information ecology, and I can't heal the polarization. I can't heal the global intimacy disorder unless we have a new story. Now we're saying, we're putting the two together. We're saying we need a new story of value rooted in first principles and first values, and that neither by itself works. Now, we talked about that in our previous broadcast, and I want to deepen into it for a second. So one, and it's a very big deal, story evokes allurement. And allurement, and this is from my friend Rachel, allurement's a core principle of cosmos, and we've talked about the principles of allurement in our tenets of intimacy. But allurement is a structure of cosmos all the way up and all the way down the evolutionary chain. Story generates allurement, both in a negative and a positive way. Remember the Count of Monte Cristo, right? The great revenge story, right? He's allured, right, in a kind of tragic, beautiful, tragic way. He's got to complete that which is incomplete in his story. So he plots his entire life around vengeance. And in vengeance has a holy spark. And the holy spark is, I can't leave the story incomplete. Now that holy spark gets distorted, right? Vengeance is the holy spark of justice, but vengeance is the corruption, right? The degradation of that spark. It's a different conversation. But what you get in the Count of Monte Cristo is that he's not willing to let the storyline go, and there's a nobility in that. And sometimes there's moments where you got to let dimensions of the story go, right? But that's, okay, so there's this notion of story, right? We're allured by story, both negatively, right? There's a negative, right? And we're going to make distinctions next week between what are the dimensions of a story that you need to step out of, what are the dimensions of a story that you need to embrace. We're going to distinguish between an ego story and a unique self story, a victim story and a unique self story. So let's bracket that for now. Just for now, I just want to feel story has a power of allurement, of attraction, and story arouses will. All right? Story arouses will. First principles and first values also allure me. And first principles and first values also arouse will. They arouse personal will. I'm standing for a principle. I won't back down because I know this is an intrinsic principle of cosmos. So first principles and first values allure me, and they arouse political will and personal will as well, but you need both of them. Each has a different dimension. First principles and first values are not enough. So I said last week, and I want to just say it again with your permission, right? Our dear colleague, Habermas, in the university in Germany, has, although he never uses the word first principles and first values, but he's looking for what are the implicit first principles and first values, not his words. But he refuses to engage in story. Insufficient, it won't get us home. Or my colleague, Brian Swim and Mary Evelyn Tucker, right, who work in the universe story, but their story is mythopoetic, right? It's in a postmodern context, so all true value is deconstructed, so we're just trying to tell a mythopoetic story, right, of the universe. Won't get us there. Won't take us home, right? The move is, and this is an evolutionary move we're making. This is a source code changing move. It's wildly exciting. I literally with you trembling before a sheep, right? The move is to bring first principles and first values together, okay? So let's just look at 4 examples of why that needs to be done, right? Number one, and we've given these images, and I want to just take them slower than we did in our last broadcast. So 1, pointing out instruction. Ready? Pointing out instruction. Everybody ready? Pointing out instruction. It's late at night. Who wants to say the next sentence? Anybody? It's late at night. You turn on what? Netflix. Netflix is the new addiction structure of modern society, right? When lots of us were growing up, TV was off at 12, and there were 3 channels and 1 educational channel. Now Netflix is 24 hours a day, and it's actually an addictive structure that gives enormous gift and causes enormous damage. That's a different conversation, right? But for now, you're on Netflix. You got a choice. You can watch this great documentary about some principles in reality, or this fantastic movie that you can see, this unbelievable story. Now, how do you feel? Just find it in your body. This is a pointing out instruction, right? When you go to watch the movie, your body relaxes, your heart, right? You're like, and you step into the movie and you disappear, right? In a great movie for 2 hours, you just disappear. You're merged with the characters. You feel what they feel. You yearn what they yearn. You're afraid of what they're afraid. You become and all of reality stops. A documentary, even the best documentary, you're interested. You might take a couple of notes. You might be, right, wow, that was really good information. You're excited to love it, but it doesn't have the same allurement. Now, if you take the story and the documentary, first principles and first values together with story, you put them together, you get a story of value, rooted in first principles and first values, right? Then you're there, right? And a great documentary, right, actually should be telling a story, right? It's actually, right? But it's got to be a story that's not just documentary style. See, that's the thing. You got to actually feel the drama of personal life, right, at play, okay? So I want you to, it's a good pointing out instruction to get these 2 principles. Two. Everyone ready for 2? We got a drum roll. 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 Drum roll. Drum roll. Drum roll. 2. Okay. Who remembers the movie Spartacus? Spartacus. Anybody who remembers the movie Spartacus? Spartacus. Anybody? Spartacus? Right. Let's get any yeses. Spartacus. Movie Spartacus. Anybody? Right. Kind of late night movie. Right. You're kind of like 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning. Simona. Check out Spartacus for your birthday. I think it's an early Kirk Douglas movie. It's one of the greats of the kind of, second half of the 20th century. Spartacus. Anybody else remember Spartacus? Okay, long time ago. That's right. It was a long time ago. It could have been Fellini. Okay, let's talk Fellini, says Raquel. So Spartacus. Okay, so in Spartacus, it's a movie about freedom. It's a movie about freedom. And this notion of freedom, what's freedom? Freedom is a first value and first principle of cosmos. Now, how do we actually inject reality with the first principle, the first value of freedom? So the founding fathers, for example, of the great democracies, let's say, for example, in the United States, Jefferson, John Adams, Washington, what they talk about is, stay close. It's beautiful. What they talk about this, you get this? Right? It's unbelievable, right? What they talk about this is, it's wildly beautiful. What they talk about is the story of the Exodus, right? When the Hebrew slaves leave Egypt, right? That story incarnates the first principle and first value of freedom. And then that story becomes ritualized in a dramatic retelling of that story every year on a particular day. And that ritual is called the Freedom Ritual. It's called the Passover Seder. And it's been done in an unbroken lineage chain from generation to generation, from Black slaves, right, in the southern United States to the Sudan, right, to every country in Europe, to all over Asia, to China, right? We reenact, and we don't sit and study Kant's critique, right, of right, pure reason or moral reason, right? We don't read Kant's Prolegomnon. We're trying to establish, we don't read, right, Aristotle, right? And we don't read philosophers on freedom. We tell the story of leaving Egypt because it's a story of value, which incarnates first principles and first values, which arouses the political will to create liberation. So Passover is the first story, right, in Western history, which we say we reject the idolatry or the slavery or the tyranny that says that yesterday determines today. I have the capacity to change the trajectory of the story. And when I write my story, I'm writing my story as a great evolutionary act. I'm participating in the larger story of cosmos. And so the Passover story says we reject the status quo. We reject the idolatry of yesterday, that there's an inherent freedom at the very core of the story. And I say to my dear friend, Sam Harris, no, right? Prior causation does not eliminate freedom in the moment, right? Human freedom in the moment in some dimension, right, which you can feel in the silence of consciousness, right, is the possibility of possibility, which means that I can always write a new chapter in the story. Where I actually realize that the story is at its core an unfinished story. Wow. Okay, now we're going to go even more deeply into this. But let's give the third example. Third example, and we're gonna pick this up next week. But third example, what's the third example? Third example, drum roll it is. Let's have a drum roll it is. It's wild. We're just getting started, friends. We're just getting started, right? Third example, anybody remember the third example? Third, pointing out instruction. It's a tragic pointing out instruction, but it's a critical one, right? The drum roll is, oh my God, George Floyd, right? Killed, right? By Derek Chauvin in a tragic moment, 9 minutes, neck pressed down by knee, a tragic moment. And we watched George Floyd being killed, right? And we're devastated. We're devastated not by a statistic, right? Right, of a man killed. We're devastated by watching, right, the murder happen. We see the story happen, and then we begin to hear about George Floyd's story. And when we see the murder happen, and we see George Floyd's story, we see, number one, the violation of first principles and first values, the violation of life. And we see, right, the violation of first principle, not as a statistic, not as a theoretical idea, but as an embodied story, right, in all of its tragedy, in all of its agony, right, in front of us, right? We feel the violation of story, right? We feel the violation of a story of value, right, rooted in first principles and first values, and we explode into the street because the violation of a story of value, rooted in first principles and first values, is what arouses political will. So in this moment, when we face existential risk, right, but we're in the middle of this postmodern moment, which has deconstructed the ontology of story itself, where postmodernity says the only grand narrative is that there are no grand narratives. Oh my God, right? And oh my God, right? Postmodernity does two deconstructions, and stay close, which have now filtered into the very core of society, the very core of the techplex, the very core of governance, the very core of the World Economic Forum in multiple levels. We'll talk more about this. But postmodernity says, one, there's no intrinsic value, right? As the parrot expression, the parrot expressor, right? And I say parrot not in a negative way. I'd love to have him over for dinner. I mean, he's a lovely man. But Yuval Harari, and in his book Sapiens, Yuval's not a philosopher, he kind of repeats the canards of postmodernity kind of as dogmatic truisms, right? He says value itself is but a fiction, right? There's no intrinsic value, right? It's but a social construction of reality, right? It's but these are all direct quotes, but a figment of our imagination, right? So that's one deconstruction of postmodernity. And the second is, right, all narratives, all grand narratives are false, right? They're all false. But of course, that is a grand narrative also. That's the grand narrative of postmodernity, is that there are no grand narratives, but they don't notice that performative contradiction. No, we have to reclaim story. We have to reclaim story of value. We have to reclaim a new story which integrates the best of all the old stories, all of the validated insights, which synergizes together into a new whole greater than the sum of the parts. Because that's what intimacy is. Intimacy, we have an intimacy formula. I won't go into it now, but the beginning of the formula is intimacy equals shared identity. And that shared identity, right, between different parts creates a new whole. So when we bring these different parts together into a new whole, into the new story, and we actually stand in that new story, and we stand in the value of that new story, then we can storm the barricades. Then we can bring down the Bastille, right? Then we can change history, right? It's only a new story, but a new story of value rooted in first principles and first values that can change the trajectory of history itself. Wow. Okay. So next week, we're going to take this the next step. We're going to look at fairy tale next week. And we're going to look at, right, what does it mean right? What's the relationship between my personal story and a larger story? And we're going to unpack, right, 6 new principles, right, of story and how it works in my life and in your life, right, and in the larger story. And in doing this, we're literally evolving the source code itself. Like, oh my God, right? Can you feel that with me, friends? Can you feel that with me? Oh my God, let me, just one more thing and we turn to Krista Josepha. You know, wow. The Baal Shem Tov, the great master of tales, right? The one that Buber wrote about so much, who wanders Romania and in parts of Poland and is filled, is alive, right, with magic and mystery. This figure, Israel, son of Eliezer. When the Baal Shem Tov dies, the Baal Shem Tov, who is a mystical political agitator, who ascends the highest heavens, who goes to the deepest depths, right? And who is a bodhisattva in the terms of Mahayana Buddhism, right? Working for all of reality. When the Baal Shem Tov, right, confronted a problem, right? A tragedy, a crisis was about to happen, he would go to a special place in the forest and he would light a fire. And he would say a particular prayer. And the crisis was somehow resolved. When the Baal Shem Tov dies, his student, the great Maggid of Mezrich, right? He's confronted with a crisis again. And he also is a mystical agitator, a Mahayana Buddhist bodhisattva, if you will, right? For all of reality, right? He's omni-considerate. He feels the whole inside of him, which is what an enlightened human being does. And the Maggid of Mezrich, right? When he confronts a crisis, right? He goes to that special place in the forest. He lights the fire, but he doesn't remember the words of the prayer, but he says, it's enough. I'm at the right place and I've lit the fire and it's enough. And the Maggid of Mezrich dies, right? So his student, Zushiavanipol, right, takes over the mantle, but the mantle of the outrageous lover who acts for all of reality. And he's confronted with a crisis again. And all crises are a crisis of intimacy. And he goes to the place in the forest, but he says, I don't remember how to light the fire. And I don't remember the words of the prayer even, right? But it's okay. I'm at the right place. And the crisis is somehow averted. And then he passes. And then his student Moshe Leib of Sasov, is confronted with a crisis greater than all crises. And he doesn't know how to find the place in the forest. He certainly doesn't know how to light the fire. He doesn't remember the words of the prayer. So Moshe Leib of Sasov looks heavenward and he says, but I remember the story of what my masters did. So I'll tell the story. And that will be enough for us. Friends, what's happened to us is we've forgotten the thread of the story. We can't just go back to the old stories. That won't be enough, the stories of the saints and sages. But we also can't go to the postmodern telling of my personal story. That's also not enough. The personal therapeutic encounter with story won't take us home. We have to actually begin to realize that there's a new story to be told. It's a new story about the amorous cosmos, right? Rooted in the deepest sciences, the universe, a love story. And we begin to realize that my story is evolution whispering through me. My story is chapter and verse, right, in the universal love story, right? It's ours to do, right? To tell the new story, the greatest moral erotic act, right, of this generation. Oh my God. So thank you. We're in part 2 of the story, right? We're in chapter 2 of the story right now. And next week we pick up with chapter 3. And we're doing this as an erotic evolutionary act, right? We're putting our lives on the line to tell the story and to get it right for the sake of the whole.